This is Amber Sullivan with Banking Transformed Webinars. I want to thank you for joining us today for this webinar from Coconut Software, Customer Engagement Tactics in the Age of Pandemic Banking. Before we get started, we'd like to let everyone know that the recording of this webinar will be available shortly after the webinar is concluded. If you have a question, please use the questions panel on the dashboard, as we will have a live Q&A at the end of our presentation. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Nathan Pellet, Senior Director of Product at Coconut Software, and Jim Marous, co-publisher of the Financial Brand and owner of the Digital Banking Report. Jim, I'll let you get things started.
Thanks a lot, Amber. I really appreciate it. It's good to be with everybody today, and with the people from Coconut Software. You know, we're definitely in a time of change. There's no doubt about it. And so what we're going to try to do today is talk about some of these changes and what has happened really in pretty much less than 8 weeks. So it's kind of amazing how time flies when we're all at home and doing things differently than when we're used to doing. So let's first take a look at the banking trends as we saw them at the beginning of the year. So every year we do a banking trends and priorities study and trying to determine where banks are headed, what they're thinking about, what's really motivating their efforts. And not surprisingly, for the first year and really actually 6 out of the last 7 years, to improve the customer experience was one of the key elements. It was the number one item this year. It was number two item last year, where data actually was a little bit more important in the perception of what wanted to be done. But what is interesting is that while the order of these trends really hasn't changed too much, and it hasn't even changed too much since the pandemic started, what we have seen is the intensity and the importance of these going way up. So I think especially in the top tier, if you were to ask bankers today, name the top three, this is the way we built the survey, name the top three priorities or areas of key interest, it would be customer experience, it would be data, it would be multi-channel delivery, and probably some open banking. But overall, what we would see is the order wouldn't change too much. I'd say that the multi-channel delivery would have probably gone up, but the intensity would have gone up. At the day of closing of the branches, it depends on where you are as far as when that happened, or the shutting down of the inside offices. Financial institutions were really challenged because the difference between those that I will call were faking digital versus really doing digital became very important. Next slide. As we closed our offices, we realized that our ability to engage with consumers, our ability to actually transact, to keep in communication with, to have conversation with consumers was very branch-based in many ways. Even those organizations that said they were digital, even those organizations that the Digital Bank Report found that they said they currently have digital account opening, were caught off guard by the fact that, as in our studies found, when 70% of the organizations said they had digital account opening, and then we asked, do you require the person come to the branch? 70% of those organizations said yes. So let's just do the math. How many organizations were actually able to open accounts since COVID-19 has started? How many of them have completely changed their priority structure to make sure that the things that we weren't able to do digitally, we're able to do digitally now? On the next slide, you'll see that the banking industry, and we've shown this before, when we ask them, where is your maturity as far as digital transformation? Less than 15% thought of themselves as a digital transformation leader. 34%, and a total of 64%, consider themselves in the kind of the middle, as it shows in this bar chart. What you'll see, though, that is that really tempting middle, that fast follower area, that used to be the area that most financial institutions felt very comfortable with, is not a very comfortable place to be in when change happens overnight. The speed of change no longer allows organizations the luxury of incremental adjustments. In fact, in an article I wrote this week for the Financial Brand, I said that organizations have to throw out their 2020 business plans. Those business plans, strategic plans, were usually built using incremental adjustments to what was being done the previous year. In the beginning of March, or in some cases the beginning of April, for organizations, we immediately had a stop of the globe. This earth stopped moving and called attention to the fact that in many cases we really weren't ready to engage and to transact in a digital way. This came out on the consumer side as well as the small business side. In my situation, my consumer bank continued to talk to me just like they did every one of their other customers. It was very clear from the communications. My business bank, which I would expect to be a little bit better from the ability to talk to me as an individual business, the first email and the only email I've gotten from them said, "We like you as a customer. We have programs that we'd like to talk to you about. If you don't already have online banking, please sign up for today." I've had online banking since the first time I walked in the branch to open the account. I also have mobile banking. Why would an organization communicate to me like that when they have data that tells them that I'm different than some other customers? More importantly, why is it that my financial institution not once has reached out to me and said, "Have you seen what's going on in the PPP space, the Small Business Administration loans?" Now that's frustrating me as a consumer and as a small business owner, because those organizations reach out to me continuously about investment ideas and borrowing ideas. But now that I'm the one who needs their services, they're not reaching out to me. It's not like I don't believe it's that they don't want to reach out. In many cases, they don't have the mechanism to reach out. On the next slide, you'll see that digital transformation is no longer optional. When we looked at the status of specific digital transformation strategies, we saw that the top ones really had to do with the basics: end-to-end digital account opening, mobile small business banking app, the digital new customer onboarding process, and end-to-end digital consumer loans. But when we talk about what's really important to the consumer or the small business, we're not just talking about those top ones. If you don't go to the bottom one, personalized communication, predictive advisory alerts, virtual and visual agent chat capability, those are the ones that are going to differentiate your organization from other organizations. Those are the ones that the consumers can be more and more aware of. If I'm an elderly person that really never used digital banking before, but over the last 5 to 7 weeks have become very comfortable with FaceTime video, with maybe Zoom engagement, with maybe having my groceries delivered to my house, and now that delivery service recommending what I may need based on my reorder cycle, they're going to become much more aware of what banks and other financial institutions should be able to do on their benefit without being asked. So as we look at what happens as a result of COVID-19, digital account opening is no longer optional. I'm not talking about digital account opening that needs additional engagement. I'm talking about the total end-to-end process. Digital small business lending, those organizations that were not ready to respond to the PPP Small Business Association lending were usually those that did not have a digital process in place. It was all paper-based. Personalized engagement, the ability to reach out on an instant and be able to help their customers during these times of need, and digital customer care. Next slide. As you'll see, data is the core of digital banking transformation. In the digital banking report, when we asked organizations, what is the most important use of data and advanced analytics? First was audience targeting, marketing planning, ability to deliver communication across channels, proactive advice, again, and real-time personalized contextual offers was near the bottom. But as you can see, Financial institutions weren't doing well in any of the categories. The best was audience targeting, and what we find in deeper research is that we're defining personalization, the use of data, very loosely. We believe that data and AI is at the foundation of every single thing that financial institutions have to do going forward. It's no longer going to be acceptable to treat everybody the same. We're not just talking about changing the name on an email communication. We're talking about understanding the customer's needs and wants and how we can help them do better. On the next slide, when you look at the architecture of a next generation bank, the most important component is omnichannel delivery. In other words, will you handle me the same digitally as you would have done if I was in the branch? Now, this does not mean digital as in all mechanics. The new wave of digital is to make it human, to be able to humanize a digital engagement so that the consumer says, I'm comfortable in working with you and I trust you and I'm satisfied with the way you're handling me. When J.D. Powers does their study on how consumers think the digital process goes, they give it a much lower rating than branch engagement, but it's not because they're getting bad experiences. It's because in most cases, financial institutions are not prepared to deliver humanized, really advanced capabilities on a digital basis. So if you're not able to communicate with me the way I want through digital channels, and you really haven't looked at digital the way it has to be done. So how do we get there? Number one, and I'm going to recommend this all the way across the board, it doesn't matter how big or small your organization is, build partnerships. At last year's Financial Brand Forum, the thing that probably amazed me the most was how much solution providers were working together on behalf of financial institutions to deliver better experiences. You'd see the Salesforces and the Conys and the MXs and the Harlan Clarks and the Coconuts, all Coconut Software, all these organizations working together to say, we'll work with your data. It may not be the prettiest, but we'll work to make it so that you can get to the next level of digital transformation, digital engagement. So to get to the next level, to make it look like and to make it so you actually are a next generation bank, we highly recommend building partnerships. Because not only are you going to need partners to say, who's already traveled this path that I can get help with, but more importantly, how can we move that path further and use our partners to give us the intelligence, the talent that we need going forward? So what else has happened during COVID? Next slide. This slide should resonate with everybody on the phone. I'm not too sure if anybody hasn't had a Zoom meeting in the last 5 weeks. And I would bet that the vast majority of people on this call right now have not had a Zoom meeting before this. We've had cocktail parties, we've had meetings, we've had meeting up with friends one-to-one, everybody using video communication. Video is the way to get the best level of engagement. The question is your organization ready when you open the doors to engage with the consumer the way they want to be engaged with? Because just because you've opened your door does not mean the consumer is going to want to walk through it. So if you have a consumer that says, you know what, I'm not really comfortable coming out of my house yet. Things aren't the way I really want them to be. I appreciate the fact you're open. How can I meet with the platform employee? How can I meet with somebody I recognize? They'll expect to be able to engage on a video basis. The problem is many organizations do not even allow outside programs to be accessed by branch employees. Therefore, when my mother-in-law calls up and says, I want to see a banker, and they go, well, we can't, we don't have a digital way of doing that. She may be the one who says, well, what's wrong with FaceTime? What's wrong with Zoom? So are you moving at the pace that the consumer is as they are digitally transforming themselves? On the next slide. You know what would be interesting is that I mentioned at the beginning, organizations can no longer fake digital. If you're not building digital from the very foundation of your organization up to the top, you will be caught in situations like this where everything else shuts down. And as I mentioned, just because you offer digital does not mean that it can't be human. There's ways to combine the digital capabilities and the efficiency, the lower cost of engagement with highly human aspects. There are bots out there that can sound just like humans. Now, bots delivered poorly is just like audio or phone calls or automated transactions delivered poorly. So you have to be careful to make sure that when you decide to move forward and make the human aspect of your digital engagement stronger, you're going to have to make sure that it really isn't just taking the lowest common denominator. Because while the globe has stopped turning during COVID, the consumer has kept on learning. They learned what is possible. They've learned from each of your organizations who's standing on my side and who really only is standing by my side when things are good. Many consumers, many small businesses, maybe many corporations are going to be struggling for a long time. Part of their trust, part of their comfort level is going to be driven by how well you engage with them. There's a lot of people out there that are tapping out on their credit cards, had overdrafts before they got their stimulus checks, are having a hard time putting food on the table. They're going to judge you not just on how can you give them loans or deposits or give them funding, but more importantly, are you a safe haven? Are you an island of comfort in this tremendous storm of COVID? And the key then is, how are you engaging? Are you there to at least listen to them? And are you listening to them the way they want to be listened to? So that's it for mine. I just want to turn it over to Nathan now. He's going to be discussing some of the things that Coconut Software can do. But Shirley, ask any questions. If you have them, you can type them in online and we'll be sure to answer them as we go forward.
Thanks, Jim. That was fantastic at setting the stage of really where we find ourselves right now today. So for my half of this presentation, I'm going to take the scenario that we find ourselves in and provide you with a couple of tactics that we really recommend as a springboard for how you enable the kinds of human but digital engagements that Jim was talking about there. So for the agenda today, I'm going to look at two of the major pandemic banking challenges that we're probably most frequently hearing about from the folks that we talk to in our customer base and who are just talking to in the financial industry at large. And then we're going to provide some tactics to address those challenges, some steps that you can take today, and then we're going to wrap this all up with some open Q&A. So as Jim already mentioned, if you've got some questions, please fire them into the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. Next slide, please. But before we dive into that presentation, though, we do have a polling question that I want to start with here. So you can pull this up. So how do you think your organization is doing in adapting to our new way of living? So are you doing great? Did you have a contingency plan ahead of time, and have you executed on that effectively? Or are you finding that maybe there is some more room for improvement, but generally speaking, you're doing all right? Or are you really encountering some trouble and maybe your contingency plan didn't have the appropriate execution steps to actually get that rolled out to market as quickly or as smoothly as you would have liked? So please fire your answers in there, and we'll see what the audience has to say about how we're dealing with this so far. Okay, so yeah, about 2/3 of the attendees are kind of in that middle room. So had some bumps in the road, but room for improvement. That's fantastic because that's kind of what we framed this around, is that we assume that everyone is kind of getting by on a day-to-day basis, but we all sort of feel like we could be doing better. I don't think many of us expected a global pandemic to be a major banking challenge when we were putting together our plans for 2020. It certainly was not for us at Coconut Software. So I think we're all figuring out exactly how to adapt to this. I hope that I can provide some additional layers of insights that might be able to help you improve that. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So I'm just going to quickly highlight what I see as the two major challenges that we've been facing. Number one is physical access to banking. So generally speaking, I'm hearing that many, if not all, branches in your branch networks are being closed. However, there are still some use cases for physical access to banking right now, and I'm going to dive into that a little bit more later. Next slide, please. Second challenge that I'm really looking to go through this session is contact center overload. So the other really common thing that we're hearing about is, as everyone moves to this virtual engagement with their financial institution, the ensuing result is that contact centers are being overloaded. Something that was maybe a secondary or tertiary channel for interacting with your customer base is now channel number one, and there's some serious capacity issues for that. And so I'm going to dive into how we might address those challenges as well a little bit later. But before we get into the details of either of these, here is the one thing that I really want everyone to take away. I think the single most important thing for you to build and deliver to your customer base is clear messaging about how they can access all of your services in this wildly different world that we're in right now. So I'm going to provide some examples about that later, how we recommend you might go about doing that. But I think this is the number one most important takeaway. Clear messaging about how they can access what you have to offer is so vitally important. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, challenge number one, physical access to banking. So I think the key thing here is, how do you safely enable access to banking services that require the branch? So for example, I think probably the most poignant example that has been highlighted to me and my team has been access to safety deposit boxes. Many of your customers are going to have absolutely vital documentation stored away in safety deposit boxes. And, you can't really say, hey, yeah, you know what, you just can't access this for the next undetermined amount of time. So how do we actually provide a mechanism so that they can get in there safely themselves, and so that you can protect your staff at the same time? Okay, so next slide, please. So first step is limit access. I think most institutions are doing this already, but we highly recommend, not just letting everyone in. I think that's kind of a no-brainer. So what does that look like? Next step, please. Lock the doors. Don't just let anyone walk in. But the flip side is you should get a greeter. So I know a lot of branches have sort of done away with the notion of having a greeter. At this point in time, with the locked doors scenario, having someone to actually physically manage that ideally greatly limited flow of traffic is going to create that human experience. Ideally, you're doing so in a safe and distanced way, but it's probably a vital component here. Okay, now, customer shows up to your branch. Doors are locked. There's someone inside. They're not really sure what's up. How do they know what's up? Next slide, please. You should have a very clear new piece of signage right on that door. So we've actually put together an example here of what you might put on your door to give them some very clear calls to action in terms of how they can access your physical branch, and ideally redirect them to digital and phone banking services, things that don't actually require that physical access. So what should be on this sign? Your new business hours. We're hearing that most branches that do remain open at least have modified business hours. You should make that clear to your customer base. 2, information on how to get in. So we really recommend that if you are going to let people into your branch, that you have them do so on an appointment basis. As I've already mentioned, a call to action to go digital, and something like a QR code right on there, in addition to a URL, to make it as easy as possible for them to do so right then and there, is a really good idea. And then finally, your phone number. And as I'll get into a little bit later in challenge 2, there may be more than one phone number depending on the type of service that they're trying to access. The thing that I really want to mention about these signs is that I think that it's really important that they're large and they're legible. So make sure that it's something that if I take a picture of it with my smartphone, because I'm one of your customers, that when I look at that picture on my smartphone, it's still easy to read and so on. So make sure you've got big, bold print on it, and it is the types of thing that translates well to that way that they're likely to store that. Okay, so someone shows up at your branch, you've got the greeter there, maybe they made an appointment ahead of time. What then? So the priority should be to keep your staff as safe as possible. So avoiding touching each other, obviously, but avoiding touching the same surfaces is important as well. So doing things like using your existing infrastructure to keep distance between your customers and your staff is a really good idea, because it's going to feel natural. If you've got big desks or big greeter tables that you can sort of have your staff sit behind, so that you create that natural physical distancing, but that feels natural to your customer base as well, is a really good idea. And then beyond that, you should plan to have time between each one of these walk-ins, so that you can do things like disinfect any surfaces that they might have come into contact with. So if you've got this greeter desk that they might come up to and put their hands all over, that you have things like disinfectant available to that greeter that's manning the door, so that they can wipe that down between engagements with your customer base. And then obviously you should wash your hands frequently. We probably recommend between every engagement with these new customers. Okay, next slide, please. So let's talk about challenge number 2, contact center overload. So I'm hearing that many call centers are overwhelmed with call traffic. I've seen in some instances where the callback period is as much as 5 or more business days. So let's look at some of the tactics that you can employ to actually address that problem and alleviate it for your customer base and for your staff. So number 1, add capacity. This is sort of that no-brainer kind of answer, but the really hard part is addressing the question of, okay, how do I actually do that? So just going out and hiring a whole bunch of temporary call center staff certainly doesn't seem feasible, and that's not what I'm suggesting when I say add capacity. So the solution that I would recommend is that you actually turn your branch staff, who already know your service offerings, ideally know your customer base as well, into call center staff. And when I say that, I don't mean that they are manning the exact same call center system that they are, but rather that you're able to segment your service offering so that your call center staff can continue to operate in the way that they're trained to do so, but that your branch staff actually continue to operate the way that they do, but primarily over the phone instead of face-to-face. So let's take a look at how you actually logistically do that. So next slide, please. So we suggest that you provide phone and or video appointments. Okay, so there's a number of ways that you can do that. We could provide the actual digital engagement through things like Skype and Zoom or Microsoft Teams or WebEx. I think this is one of those things that much of the industry saw as way in the future at the beginning of, well, maybe not way in the future, but certainly into the future as we entered 2020. Things like Zoom weren't common amongst the general populace. I think that you'll find that they're primarily used by, those tech leader types. Increasingly, things like Zoom are everyday tools, though, and I think that you're going to find that your customer base is increasingly comfortable with it, and to the point where they're going to actually demand it. So how do you actually connect your customer base to your branch staff who is now behind a Zoom meeting, possibly at home? Well, our suggestion would be that you actually create some sort of appointment scheduling portal through your website. And so Coconut Software provides something like that. So do a bunch of other services out there. You should probably make this happen. Next step, please. Beyond that, this is a thing that we're seeing a lot of institutions do already, but I think it's really worth emphasizing, is that you should really consider having an entirely new line of services that are entirely revolving around the situations that individuals find themselves in during this pandemic. So you likely have a service line for individual consumers and for businesses where you can provide them the kinds of advice that most financial institutions are already looking to do, but with a new spin on it, where the advice is not, hey, how do you plan for your healthy financial future, but instead, how do you plan for the very hard times that you find yourselves in right now, and how do you do things like access the government services that are available to you right now that you may not know about. And I think that financial institutions have a real opportunity here to be that helping hand that really helps people when they're in need and actually make them really feel like they're cared for, as opposed to in this all alone. Next slide, please. Here's another thing that I want to really emphasize. Don't make people wait for hours on hold. If your phone system supports it already, leverage call me back systems. Nobody likes waiting on hold for hours. I think people are fairly understanding that call centers are being overwhelmed at this point in time, but be transparent with them that that's the case. Let them know, hey, it might take us 24 hours to get back to you. Leave your, call in, we'll get your phone number, we'll call you back. If your phone system does not have a call me back function, leverage something else to do so. So for instance, Coconut has a call me back queue. People can enter their information in there. They get entered in the queue. You can then have your call center or branch advisory staff call them back when they come up in the queue. This is a great way to sort of reduce load on your call system and to make people feel like, you actually care about their time and they're not just being treated as a number. Next slide, please. The other thing that I want to talk about is having a really good website user experience. So right back to my number one takeaway for this is, how do I access your services now? So I think probably the thing we are most commonly seeing most organizations do is that little COVID banner at the top where they say, hey, this is what we're doing to help you during COVID-19. Click here to find out more. I think that's a relatively good solution, but the really tricky part is what's on the other side of that banner. So let's take a look at the next slide here. You should have some very clear calls to action at the very top of the other side of that. I've seen a bunch of examples where you end up on that COVID page and you're confronted with a wall of text. And quite often there's tons of really important, really valuable information in there, but I've got to read a novel to get to the piece that I actually care about. Give them a table of contents and then provide all of the information behind it. All of that info is really good, but you've got to make it really simple for them to find that route that is most important to them here. So, hey, call me back when there's a moment to do so, or no, I need help right now, or how do I access the digital banking because I've never done so and now I need to for the first time. Having all of those clear calls to action here that you might already have in place, but making sure that you frame it in this new COVID environment, I think is really vitally important. Okay, next slide, please. In conclusion, what I want to say is that I think if you treat people really well during a time of crisis, they'll remember how you made them feel. So I really want to echo Jim's point from his talk that making them feel like you care about them individually and you've personalized the content for them and you've been really thoughtful about how you make your service offering safe and accessible to them right now will make them remember how you made them feel in the long run. And I think it's really valuable for us to not lose sight of sort of our long-term goals here of having happy and loyal customers. I think there's actually a tremendous opportunity for us to drive that as financial institutions right now. Next slide, please. I think now we're going to head into some Q&A. I'd like to thank everyone for attending. Really appreciate you spending some time with us today. Amber, do you want to kick off the first questions?
Yeah, for sure. So we've got quite an active Q&A going right now. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to enter more questions here. Hi, can you hear me? Hi there, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Not
okay, great.
Hearing Amber.
Yep.
Hi there, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. So I'm going to head into the Q&A here. Let's see.
Just seeing if I can access the questions here myself.
Hi there, can you hear me?
I'm hearing you. If somebody can, from the audience, can type in as if it was a question, if they can hear you.
Okay, great. Yes, okay, great. So they can hear me, great. All right, so unfortunately, sorry for that technical difficulty. I don't think Nathan can hear us at this time, but I'm going to go ahead and start the Q&A with Jim. So Jim, if that's all right with you, I'm going to go ahead and get to some questions. All right.
No problem.
So, this is a really good, timely question here. So what are the top 3 biggest challenges with digital marketing and small banks right now? And what do banks need to know right now to plan for this long-term strategy in an unpredictable climate?
The strategy overall is not a whole lot different than it was pre-COVID, except the urgency has obviously increased. So I think, first of all, if I was a small bank, a leader of a small bank, the first thing I do is say, what do I have to get done right now? In other words, this whole idea of digital transformation is bigger than a bread box. And it's better to fake it than not have it at all. As much as I kid about the fact that, those of us that have not really built digital organizations. So first and foremost, we do not know how long the COVID crisis is going to continue. We also don't know that even if we're given the opportunity to open our branches, number one, are we going to? And number two, are people going to visit? So number one, make sure you build a completely end-to-end digital account opening process and digital lending process. There are more than a few partners out there that can help you in that process, but you have to. It's not even an option anymore. You need to go along that process and get it right. Secondly, and I think Nathan would agree with me on this, is you have to make sure you have ways that you can engage with consumers that do not want to come to the branch anymore, but still value the branch interaction. So work within your own teams to say, okay, how can we do this? We have some financial institutions right now that have built, and it's sometimes easier to build today than it will be once you get back in the branches, Zoom meetings where people within a branch area can actually talk to and see their branch staff on the Zoom outlet. So you basically have the new accounts person, the manager of the branch, and maybe 2 or 3 tellers on a Zoom call, just discussing what they're doing right now, how they keep themselves busy, how they deal with work from home. In addition, and this was something that was done by Edmonds Bank in Oklahoma, and this is not going to sound like it's a digital answer, but it's an answer to get you through this period. I know a number of people that work the auto teller line that right now, on Fridays and on other days, they have lines that could extend over an hour from people wanting to do transactions. Put another person on the auto teller line. And what I mean by that is not inside handling auto teller transactions, but put them in line to take people out of line and help them with their transactions, maybe using their mobile phone, or maybe just telling them verbally how to do what they want to do without having to stand in line. Part of the digital banking process is education. One of the best places to get education right now is in the auto teller line. These are people that have not let go of the branch, but also do not feel comfortable with digital transformation. So how can we help them do better? Finally, sorry for the long answer, but there's a number of things that have to be done here. It is very important that you figure out a way to truly look at the internal operations, because just because you turn something to digital doesn't mean you've made it easy. Again, a lot of partners out there that can make digital integration, digital transformation, and digital engagement easier. I suggest highly that that's important to do.
Great. Thank you so much, Jim. And Nathan, I believe we have you back. Is that right?
I am back. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Apparently my audio cut out completely, so I guess you were hearing me, but I was not hearing anything on my end, so my apologies.
Yeah, but you know what?
This
was a great example of crowdsourcing, because I was able to hear from the audience in the questions panel, who they could hear and how it was working. So thanks everybody for giving us that feedback and letting us know who you could hear and getting us back online. So we appreciate all that participation there. And speaking of participation, we are just having great engagement here with these questions. So I'm going to go ahead and Nathan, I've got one that I think we can, that I think should be fielded your way. So let's see, this is a great question. So, what is this the new normal is really the question. And I think you each probably have your own opinion on that, but that's really sort of a simple, but also not simple question. So Nathan, I'll let you take that one first.
Yeah, so is this the new normal? I don't think the answer is a clear yes, but I think it is going to fundamentally change the way that consumers expect to interact with their bank, with retail, with the rest of the world in general. So do I think that things like having a video meeting with your financial advisor is going to be part of the new normal? Absolutely. I think that there are a lot of good things that we're learning about what we're being forced to do right now, that some of them we're actually kind of going, hey, that's actually pretty convenient. I like the way that works. I think it should maybe stay like that. So I think that if your opinion is, oh, well, you know what, I'm just going to weather the storm and continue with operations as they were before, and then we'll get back to normal in a few months' time, I think your head's probably in the sand. Things are certainly going to change. I don't think we're in the new normal right now, but I think the new normal will certainly be different than the old normal.
Okay, great. Jim, do you have any thoughts on that?
Just one thing that I didn't mention in the last comment, and that is part of the new normal is going to be a heavier focus on savings. I think this is going to be a transformational moment, very much like the Depression was. We are seeing savings accounts growing much more than you would think, especially seeing that not a lot of people have money to save at this point. But I think we're going to see a very big rise in savings accounts, which means you need to be able to open all accounts that way. But I think also, as was said by Nathan, that I think we have to remember that overall, the new normal is going to be more like it is today than it was like yesterday. We are not going to be going back.
Okay, great. So let's see, I'm going to go to our questions panel here again. All right. So this says, we have our branch people operate like a contact center. Trying to run a contact center with branch behaviors and processes introduces inefficiency. What are some ways we can mitigate that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. It's a little challenging for me to answer because I'm not entirely sure what the inefficiencies are. And to some extent, I think some of the inefficiencies that you see with branch staff operating like a call center is because they're actually more used to the personal side of the engagements with your client base. So, when you actually meet someone face to face, I think our own human inclination is to, have a little bit of small talk when you first meet each other, and you sort of have this warming up period where you're getting to know each other. Whereas in a call center, it tends to be straight to business. What can I help you with? I'm going to address your problem, move on to the next one. And so I think one of the major challenges that institutions face right now when they do what I'm prescribing, which is, hey, you should leverage your branch staff as call center staff, is, well, what does that service offering look like? Should that service offering look exactly like our call center service offering, where it is straight to business? What's your problem? How do I, resolve that as quickly as possible? Next phone call. Or is it a little bit closer to that, branch model where personal relationships matter? Let's make you feel like an individual. I think that's going to depend on your organization and how much you value that personal relationship building piece. I think generally speaking, what I would advise though is really reminding your branch staff that tracking how long they're on each phone call makes sense. If you've got some of your call center software that allows them to easily do that, track call time, track the first resolution, all of those sorts of things that we know to be good practices in your call center. Doing a little bit of professional development and organizational training for your branch staff to get them up to speed on those call center practices is probably a good idea. I would caution you against treating them exactly like call center staff though. I think I would prescribe that it is something slightly different, because most cases that the branch staff specialize in building relationships and becoming that trusted advisor. And so it's a little bit more than just driving to that resolution quickly. It's a tricky topic, though. It's a good question.
Okay, great. Let's see. Here's a new question that just popped in. So we use chat on our website. Any suggestions on how to use that to help with the call volume at our call center?
Yeah, so I think the number one question for me is this totally automated chat? So is this driven by a virtual assistant or a chat bot? Or is this chat that is actually being fielded by your call center staff, by humans there? Because I think depending on what it is, the answer is very different. Because obviously, if it's a bot and it's a well-trained bot, that can really meaningfully offload the load from your call center. However, as Jim mentioned earlier, if it's a poor implementation of a bot, that can be an incredibly frustrating experience and may actually slow down your call center. I know I've personally experienced talking to a bot and then going to the call center and having to repeat myself and being very frustrated. And it probably actually prolongs the time to resolution because I am frustrated already. If it is your call center staff that's fielding these questions, then the big question is, how are they effectively juggling those two duties? Like, you have that segmented where some people are on chat and some people are on calls, or they, interleaving both. Those are things that kind of depend on how your call center's set up and how you're running that there. I would recommend that actually the most important thing you can do is cutting them off before they even get to the chat bot, so that you can direct them to the channel that will actually give them the solution that they're looking for. So really kind of going back to my point about creating really great signage and web UX to direct your customer base to the place that has the solution for their problem.
Okay, great. Thank you. This is a question that came in, and I have a feeling Jim will have some thoughts on this one, but the question is, how can our culture be shared in these new technologies?
Well, culture is a tough one to change. A couple things. If it's not believed in without any hesitation or reservation at the very top, you're not going to change culture. The reality is, think of any, be it an organization, be it a government, be it a household. You can't change a culture without the person in charge being completely behind it. And then it has to be reinforced from top to bottom. What is very difficult, this was said to me by a banker in Nairobi, Kenya, actually a couple of years ago, says the problem with changing cultures, bankers can't get out of their own way. And that's part of the challenge, because unfortunately, all our training, all of our legacy, all of our comfort zone has to do with, pretty much what we've learned in the past. To bring in new people and have them go through a management training program that starts with, oh, by the way, we're going to let you go through 2 years of management training to see how we do things. There's something wrong with that comment when you're trying to change culture. So it sounds very elementary, and to a degree it is, but it's the most important component. And you can get so many examples in the marketplace. For instance, if you go to a restaurant and there's a bad wait staff, you know that it's not the wait staff, it's who hires them. It's the culture of the restaurant. It's why certain restaurants fail and other ones succeed. It's why certain small businesses fail or succeed, why some big businesses do. So I think first of all is if you can get the ear of the leader of the organization going the only way, because right now what's good is that the COVID crisis has created an environment where you can see exactly what it takes to not succeed, as well as what it takes to succeed. The good news is if you're a small organization, you're trying to turn around a pickup truck compared to some of the larger organizations that are trying to turn around a semi. And I use that analogy quite a bit, and it's not my own, but I think it is, what you have to do is look at it and say, how do we build this in the future? How do we do this? And we got to do it from the top down.
Okay, great. That's great insights. Thanks, Jim. All right, so I think we're going to have time for about one more question. So I'm going to direct this one over to Nathan. This attendee has some concerns about their branch traffic. So their question is, what are some ways to get our current walk-ins to schedule appointments ahead of time? Even during the COVID crisis, we're in a busy location and want to avoid having people in our lobby.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different ways that I would suggest tackling this. One is the signage on the door, like I showed earlier. So actually, if you follow this link that you've got on the screen here to coconutsoftware.com/distance banking, we are actually going to provide that, so you can go download it, take that, plug your information in it, throw your branding on it, putting that sign up on your door saying, hey, we would really prefer if you set an appointment to meet with us so that we can limit the number of people who are in here at any point in time for your own health and safety, can have a big impact. I would suggest doing the same thing on your website. You've got that COVID banner behind there, like primary call to action. Book an appointment if you want to come into our branch. The more that you can emphasize that through as many channels as possible, the better. The other option that's available to you is to actually sort of take a hybrid model here where you're essentially setting an on-demand appointment when you arrive at the branch. So one of the things that we provide through Coconut Software is the ability to get into a virtual queue through a mobile optimized web page. And so you might put a QR code on the door where you can say, hey, I'm going to get in line. And they don't necessarily have to go into that busy branch with lots of other people. They might be able to wait in their car, for instance. And then you can send them a text message or call them when it is their turn to actually enter the location. And you could sort of offer this hybrid model where they're essentially setting an appointment, but doing so in an on-demand basis, because changing human behavior can be very challenging. So we do provide some ways to sort of do both.
Okay, great. So I believe that ends our Q&A for today. Nathan, if you want to send us out, and just thanks everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Amber. Thanks everyone for attending today. Thank you, Jim, for your insights on where the market is at today. I think there's some really great content in there. And thank you from Coconut Software. And if you want to dive deeper in terms of how you might actually address some of these challenges at your institution, please contact us. We'd love to work with you to help you do that.